Now, I think I read somewhere that it's YouTube law that if you're going to be a content provider, you must be able to ride a skateboard or own multiple guitars. Now, luckily enough, I own multiple guitars because I'm absolutely hopeless on a skateboard. Welcome to this edition of Lightroom Bite Size. Now, in this edition, I'm going to take you on a tour around the Develop module, and I will introduce you to the various tools and describe what they do. Now, in future tutorials, I'll go into each tool in greater detail. So this is more like an introduction style video. Now, stay tuned. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. It's really interesting, and I hope it makes you feel a bit more comfortable when you jump into the Develop module. But before we start, let's watch those titles. So here we are then in the Develop module. Now, the whole purpose of the Develop module is to help you take your photograph from import right through to the final edit for print or to show online. Inside of this Develop module, you can correct all your exposures, you can change the colors, you can fix the white balance, you can remove noise, you can correct lens distortions, you can crop your image, you can put effects on it, you can put presets on it, you can do so much. It is a massive, massive piece of software. Now, in this short video, I'll try and keep it short as possible. I'm just going to give you a tour of the Develop module and just mention what each sort of item does. Now, in future tutorials, I'll go into each specific item in greater detail. But as I say, this video is all about introducing you to the Develop module. So let's take a look at this first image then. It's an image that I shot in Madrid earlier this year, and I shot it in the RAW format. Now, you've got two options. You can shoot in RAW or JPEG. The RAW images tend to retain more detail, and they certainly have more dynamic range, and this allows you to push them a bit more, push them a bit further when you're creating your edits. That said, if it was in JPEG, I would be able to perform the same sort of edits. It's just that a RAW shot has a bit more dynamic range. Now, this is what Lightroom is fantastic for, because in that shot you can clearly see it's underexposed. However, the sky isn't. The sky is fine, isn't it? Now, what tends to happen is if you have areas that are overexposed, then to be fair, you can't really reclaim any of the detail within that overexposed area. Now, it's a lot easier to reclaim the sort of details and to brighten up the shadows. And that's what I did with this image. So when I took the image, I knew that as long as I had the sky right, I could actually correct for the shadows. And that's what I did. And the shot ended up looking like this. It's amazing, isn't it, what you can do, to think that, you know, it was like this, and with the corrections made in Lightroom, it became this. And that's what Lightroom's all about. So let's look at some of the options that you have, well, the many options you have. And as I say, I'll try and keep things as brief as I can, and in further tutorials, I will go into things in a lot more detail. So let's have a little look around then at what we have. On this left-hand side, we have a series of drop-down palettes, and we'll go through these shortly. Along the bottom, we've got our film strip, so we can access any photograph at any time. We have this copy and paste facility here, so whatever edits you do to one shot, you can copy and then paste to the next shot, which is really useful, speeds things up. And then we have the really sexy side over here, where we've got all these various ways of editing our photographs. So let's start over in this top left-hand screen then, very simply with the navigator. And the navigator does exactly what it says. It helps you navigate around your image. So we have a series of options here. It's on fit at the moment, and that means it's going to fit into the center of the screen. I can zoom in quite simply by clicking on the image. I can click in the navigator too and drag around the image. Clicking in the screen or clicking on fit put it back to where it was. I can also click on the screen, and once I've zoomed in, it will go to a hand icon and allow me to drag around, so I can navigate around that way too. I can also change the ratio of how it zooms in. 2:1 is really good. Let's do something silly, like let's change that ratio to 4:1. So when I zoom in now, it's gone in 4 times bigger. That, you might find that useful, but you can change that at any time. So I click on fit, I'm going to put it back to 2:1 because that's what I prefer it to be set to. So that is the navigator. Now below that we have presets. Now you may open up your preset palette and you might have a completely different set of presets to what my version of Lightroom is showing. Lightroom does ship with presets, and of course there's many presets that you can buy online, and of course you can make your own presets. If you look at my set here, I've got the standard Lightroom set of presets, and I've added these 2 collections here of presets. I like the VSCO film emulation presets, and if I click down here and have a look, you can see that if I apply any of those presets, it will start to emulate. These are film stock, so it will emulate Kodak Porta film stock or Ilford or Fuji, depending on which one I select. Now I tend not to use presets till the very end of the edit, and I will try a film stock and see what it looks like. Other photographers will do it in different ways, and you might find a way that suits you, but presets predominantly for me is something that I add at the end of an edit. Snapshots are great. So let's change the image. Let's go to this image of Sophie. Now, once I've created my edit and I'm happy with it, I can obviously continue editing it and try some different presets or change some colors or whatever I want to do. But what I generally do is once I'm happy with the first edit, I will create a snapshot of it, and it's very easy to do. If I just expand this window here, you can see that once I was happy with my edit, I called it first edit, and then I started to change the way it looks with presets or colors or using the various editing tools that are available. So I can quite simply jump between these snapshots and decide later on which one I prefer. That one's quite dramatic, and it's great because, as you know, Lightroom's non-destructive, and creating these presets, I can just jump between them and, as I say, create some really great variation between shots, and at a later date decide which one I want to use. Or maybe in this case Sophie might call around to view the photographs and prefer something a bit different. So I will go through snapshots in greater detail, as I say, in another video. So moving on to the history palette below, let's just change our shot then to one I took in Barcelona in this Sagrada Familia. Expanding the history palette then, I can see all the moves that I made, all the edits that I performed to create this finished image that you can see on the screen. So if I go right the way back to the import, it began its life looking like this. And then through all these edits, it eventually looked like this. And the history palette is always there. When you close Lightroom down, reopen it, and then find that image, and then expand the history palette, all those edits remain there, and you can jump backwards and forwards. It's absolutely great. So that's the history palette. It's fantastic. Now below that we have collections. Now I don't want to talk about collections too much because you can watch a whole tutorial video on that, and that should just be popping up on the top of the screen. Just to explain what it is, you will have, I dare say, loads and loads of photographs stored in Lightroom, all in different folders. So imagine if you want to create one folder that has all your favorite photographs in from various different locations you've visited, or family events or weddings or whatever it is. Collections are ideal for that because you can take photographs that live in different folders and put them into one collection. and they will then appear on the film strip at the bottom of Lightroom when you jump into the Develop module. And this is fantastic. So you can see here I've created a collection for this specific tutorial video, and I've called it the Develop module. And you can see here I've got other collections that I've created, and I can just jump between them very quickly. There's one of Sophie, the newsprint, Sophie Green jacket, and I can just jump between collections, people favorites or my favorite people shots, and I can jump between those. And then right back to the Develop module, which is the one we're using at the moment. Absolutely brilliant. So that is collections, and as I say, if you want to see more about that, there's already a specific video that you can watch, and it will teach you how to do that. So let's jump across the other side then and look at all these sexy tools we have to develop our photograph. So I'm going to change the photograph to this one that I took of two lions. Let's start at the top then, like we did before. The first thing we see is the histogram. Now, a histogram is a graphical representation of general exposure. Now, if I move my mouse over this histogram, it will show me how that is divided up, which is really useful. So in the left-hand side, we have blacks. Moving across, we've got shadows. Then we have general exposure in the center. Then we have highlights, and then we have whites. Now, in the ideal world, the shape of the histogram should start in one corner and then end in the other. Now, what particular shape it is will vary between photographs, obviously. But if everything is on this left-hand side and there isn't much sort of data over here, then the shot would be underexposed. And the other way around, if all the information was on this side and there wasn't much detail on this left-hand side, then the shot would be overexposed. So I can see with this particular shot that it is a well-exposed shot. Now it needs work on it, and I hope you can see that. This is where Lightroom comes into its own. That shot is not right. It's kind of milky and there's not much contrast in it. But I'll show you as we go along how I would correct that basically. But before I do, whatever shot that you have on the screen, you can find out the information, and it's always just below the histogram. And I can see that it was shot at ISO 3200, 75mm focal length, f2.8 and 1,000th of a second. And that's really useful when you're learning about photography as well, and if you keep an eye on what settings for specific photographs, it's all knowledge, isn't it? And it will help you develop as a photographer. Below that, we have a set of tools. Now these tools, again, I will go through in greater detail in other videos, but just to quickly go through them, we've got the crop overlay tool, and we all know how to crop a photograph. I hope we do anyway, but that is a really easy tool to use. The next one is the spot removal tool, and within Lightroom you can remove very small items or spots or whatever from your photograph. It's not overly powerful to remove, difficult things. It's just very simple things, but it does work. The one next to that is the red eye correction tool. Now, I would hope that you would never take a photograph with people that have red eyes, but it is there and it does work. These guys, this is the graduated filter. The one next to it is the radial filter, and then we have the adjustment brush. Now, in this short tutorial video, there isn't enough time to go through those, so they will all be done in, as I say, individual tutorial videos, because they are really powerful tools, and as I say, we'll look at them some other time. Below that are all our editing options and tools that we can use, and I'm going to start off with the basic tool. The other ones have got sexier names, haven't they? But basic is where we start, and believe me, although it's saying basic, it's probably the most powerful set of tools and the ones you'll use all the time. So let's just quickly edit this photograph, and I'll show you how easy it is just using the basic tools. Expanding the basic palette, we have a selection of tools. Now, I normally start with the white balance. If you've shot in RAW, you can retrospectively change the white balance. If I drop this menu down, here is, you'll see this reflected in your camera settings. If you take a look on your camera, you'll see that you've got access to these different white balances. Now, when you shoot in JPEG, it doesn't give you that option to retrospectively change the white balance, although you can use the eyedropper tool and you can use the temperature sliders. Now, again, another video, I will go right through how you correct white balance. But quickly, in this shot, I think I'm going to select, try a daylight, cloudy day. Cloudy day seems to be the one that works. Now, if we look at it before and after, this was how the image was originally with no white balance correction. And then this is just changing the white balance to cloudy day. And it's warmed the shot up straight away, hasn't it? So that is a good start. Now, I would then look at the exposure, and in some cases you would have to adjust the exposure. But as I mentioned earlier, looking at the histogram, that looks pretty okay to me. It's going from one side to the other, so I'll leave that one. Contrast is something I do at the end, so I'll come back to that one. These guys are really important, and let me take you through these then. I often start with blacks, and if I put my finger on the Option or Alt key, the image on the screen will go white when I drag the slider. And you can see I'm bringing my blacks in, so I'll know exactly where the blacks are. Blacks are coming probably around about there. Yeah, that'll do. That's where my blacks are. Now, it hasn't changed much because, as I said, this was quite a well exposed shot. Do the same with whites. It's the reverse, so my whites are starting to come through just here. Now, if you're confused about what I'm doing there, let me just switch on these two little triangles on the histogram, and these will make me aware of when I am clipping the highlights or the shadows. So again, I'm going to go back to this black slider, and this time I'm going to drag it all the way to the left. Now, these blue areas, Lightroom is indicating that these are clipping. In other words, they're too black. So you can leave them switched on and just drag until they disappear. So that's another way of doing it. As I say, this shot isn't, this shot is exposed fairly well, so I don't have to worry too much about that. Then down to the vibrance. Let's just boost the vibrance up. And I'm just going to dehaze it slightly as well. And that's looking great already, isn't it? So that was the before, and this is the after. So that is how powerful the basic tools are at just getting your basic exposure right. Now, from here, you can start to correct other things. But as a basic starter, that looks fab, doesn't it? So the next tool we come to is the tone curve. Now, it's something I don't use quite often. Oddly enough, I use it quite often in Photoshop and in my video editing software, but not so much in Lightroom. What I tend to do is have a little look at the preset curves, if you like, and we've got a medium contrast and a strong contrast. It's showing at the moment the luminance, so I can brighten or darken certain areas of that shot with the curve. I can also select a colour and affect the colour with the curve as well. Now, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail. In another video I'll do that, but medium contrast, it looks quite good, doesn't it? So I'm going to leave the medium contrast curve on, and it's just dropped the shadows a little bit, dropped the blacks and lifted the highlights. In other words, it's added a bit of contrast. But yeah, by all means play around with that. It's not something I use a lot, but in this image actually that medium contrast curve has worked quite nicely. So let's leave it like that. So that's the tone curve. The next tool is the HSL. I love this tool. Hue, saturation and luminance. Hue is the specific colour, saturation is how strong that colour is, and the luminance is how bright that colour is. And as I say, this is one of my favourite tools inside of Lightroom. Now, looking at this image, it was taken, believe it or not, in the UK, in the safari park in Knowsley, which is in Liverpool. Now, it doesn't look like it's in the jungle, does it? Because we've got luscious green foliage everywhere. So let's change the colour of the foliage. And to do that, I would just simply make sure I'm in this part of the tool palette, the hue part, and these little things here adjust hue by dragging in the photo, adjust the saturation by etc. You get the idea. So if I just select that, click on something that's green, and then just drag up or down, and there you go. I am making that less green and more like it's a jungle. It certainly looks better that colour, doesn't it? And I could change the saturation or darken it, but again, in a further tutorial we'll look in depth into the hue, saturation and luminance. But that's great the way you can do that really quickly. And again, let's look at a before and after. Remember, the photograph came in looking like this, and with those quick edits it's starting to look like something really special, isn't it? So that is the HSL, and as I said, stay tuned for future videos and we'll take a more in-depth look at the fantastic edits that you can create using those sliders. Next tool then, and that would be the split toning tool. Now let's select a different photograph. Let's go for this one. Now what we have with split toning is we can affect the colours in the shadows and affect the colours in the highlights. Now again, this is something I don't use that often, but let's take a look at it anyway. So in the shadows, we've got shadows, highlights, the control of the colour via hue and saturation. So if I click on here for the shadows and I make them a blue colour maybe, now we can always go back and change that. And the highlights, I'll make a yellow colour. Now that is looking rather garish, isn't it? But I can back this off then and back the saturation off, and then have a balance of either one or the other. And it does create some great effects. So that was a before and that's an after. I kind of think that you can create a retro looking photograph with these settings. And again, I do it a different way when I do it, if I want to get that effect. But certainly play around with that. That looks quite nice, doesn't it? So that was the before and that's after. If you do it in a subtle manner, I think it can look really good. So that is split toning. So the next tool on our journey then is the detail palette. Now this set of tools will help you to reduce noise in an image and also to sharpen the image as well. So let's change our shot to this one. And if I zoom in over here, you can see what noise looks like. And we need to get rid of it. Now to do that, we use the noise reduction part of this tool palette and the luminance slider. And we just simply drag it across. I'm going to drag it halfway, and you can already see that's cleared up a lot of that noise. So that's the before and that's the after. Absolutely brilliant, isn't it? Now to sharpen an image, I jump across to the masking slider and put my finger on the Option key. Now it's the Alt key if you've got a PC. And then when I drag the slider, it gives me an outline around the key areas that I want to sharpen. Now I don't want to sharpen all this because it'll just put the noise back in. I want to sharpen just the outlines. So I would stop it about there, and now I can dial in the amount of sharpening that I would like. And that looks quite good to me, and you can mess around with the radius and the detail. But as I say, I'll go into that in more detail in another video. But if we look now, if I just drag this over here and we looked at the before and after, it's night and day, isn't it? You know, it's just so much better with that noise taken out. So that is how you get rid of noise, and that's the detail slider. Moving on then to the lens correction tool, and I'll just swap an image. I'll put this one on taken at Anfield Stadium in Liverpool. Let me just explain about lenses before I move on. The wider your lens, so if you're using a wide angle lens, it achieves that wide angle look because the lens itself, the glass on the front, is heavily curved. And obviously because it's curved, it gives you that sort of wide angle. Now one of the negative parts of that is it will distort the image. And this is where you would then enable lens correction profiles, and it will make sure things are upright and take that curve around the sort of perimeter. If you shot with a wide angle lens, it's kind of, if you take a look at some of your shots, it does curve and have this curve around the outside. So lens correction will take that away basically. Now chromatic aberration, there's a word for you. That is like purple fringing. Now again, some lenses are worse than others for introducing this purple fringing. Now this particular shot is, the reason I'm showing you this is because it's got both in, especially with it being a fisheye lens. If I just zoom in to here, I hope you can see that there is a purple line just along the edge here. Now that is something that the lens has put in, that there wasn't a purple line there, trust me. Now if I just simply click on remove chromatic aberration, that will disappear. How good's that? I remember before I discovered that, it used to take me such a long time to get rid of stuff like that in Photoshop, but simply clicking on there has removed it. Now getting on to the next part, which is the enable profile corrections. Now again, in another video we'll go heavily into this lens correction tool palette, but just for now, watch what happens when I click and to enable the profile correction. It actually will take away what it thinks is a distortion, in this case the fisheye effect. Once I'd clicked on that, I wasn't sure whether I preferred it fisheye or actually upright the way it is, so I kept both. And what do you think if I just jump to the eventual version that I went for? Although I shot it with the fisheye, I enabled a lens correction and got it to look like that. And I think I prefer that one, to be honest. But yeah, so that is lens corrections. And again, it's a lot more detailed than that. But in another video, we'll go through that together. Moving along then, we have the transform tool. So let's change our image to this one. Now what the transform tool will do, it will correct verticals and horizontals and perspective. And you need to play around with these guys to select which one is right for your particular image. Now I can see this door is it's not the angle, it's not upright basically, is it? So if I just simply click on the auto, I always try the auto first, and it's fixed it straight away. That's fantastic, isn't it? Just switch it off, switch it on, perfect, isn't it? Let's have a look at another shot. This particular door here, or this is a famous old building in Liverpool which looks nothing like it's been converted, but anyway, that's another story. And again with this, just try the auto and it's fixed it. Absolutely brilliant tool to fix the perspective and the uprights and horizontals in your shot. So that is the transform tool, and again I'll show you in on more complex shots in a future tutorial, but that's in essence what the transform tool does. And lastly, let's take a look at the effects palette and what we can do with that. So again, let's switch photographs. We're going to go for this one, and actually while I've got this on the screen, I'm just going to select auto on the transform tool, and there you go. It's corrected the verticals, and that looks much better, doesn't it? Now, does it need cropping? I think it's okay, isn't it? So I'm not going to crop that. So as I say, the last one we're going to look at then is the effects that we can, now they're not major effects. Well, we can add grain, and grain starts to make your photograph look like it's been shot with film, because film had grain in it. So depending on what photograph you have, I think it works great on people shots when you add a bit of grain. It perhaps won't work as much in this shot, but yeah, grain will just add film grain. Now, post-crop vignetting. Why is it called post-crop vignetting? Well, vignetting is a dark or light area, but in most cases obviously a dark sort of vignette or dark area around the outside of your photograph. And we usually try and get rid of that, because some lenses introduce it when, cheaper lens will introduce this dark sort of vignette around the outside. So it's called post-crop vignette because we want to add it at the end. We want to be in control of it. So watch what happens when I do that. It will start to take my eye to where the lines are, because the outer part of the image has gone darker. And I generally use post-crop vignetting on all my shots, I just love that effect. Now if I turn the feather off, you can see the shape that it's going to create, and I can make that more of a square shape. And you can control the sort of shape of it with this, the midpoint as well, how much you want to go in, and then reintroduce the feather. And there you go, that looks fantastic, doesn't it? So that is the effects. Now if you go the other way, I'm just going to remember that -42. If you go the other way, it will go white. Now I hate to see photographs like that, but you can do that. Just going to put it back to where it was. -41 will do. And let's take a look at that shot before and after. That's the way it came in. Remember, right at the start of the tutorial, right at the start of this video, that's the way that shot looked. And then that's the way it looks now. That is the power of Lightroom. Now, this video is a lot longer than I thought it would be, and it's really just giving you an introduction, I hope anyway, to the Develop module in Lightroom. Now, I need to go away now and make loads and loads of videos on the specific tools themselves, because they are so powerful, and I've really just showed you briefly what they do. So there you have it then, a simple introduction to the Lightroom Develop module. Now I hope you liked it, and as I promised, in further tutorials I'll go through each tool in greater detail with examples, and hopefully at some point in the future I'll be asking for you guys to send me images, and I will edit them and post a little video online and show you how I've done it. So if you liked the video, please stick a thumbs up, and subscribe if you haven't already. Click on the little bell icon as well. Do all those things. I'll leave that with you. You know what you're doing. And above all else though, thanks very much for watching, and it's been a pleasure to be in your company. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next upload. Bye for now.
Take a photograph and make the moment that